Speaker, can I join the Prime Minister on his comments on Grenfell, a dreadful night, and his comments on the Duke of Edinburgh, and of course his best wishes to you, Mr Speaker. Can I also say I listened carefully to what the Prime Minister just said on furlough for those newly shielding, and can I welcome that? That has been something we've been concerned about. We'll look at the proposal when it's put on the table, but I'm grateful that he's listened to that and for what he said this morning. The Prime Minister, Mr Speaker, on Monday said that feelings of black and minority ethnic groups about discrimination are founded on a cold reality. I agree with him about that. There have been at least 7 reports into racial inequality in the last 3 years alone, but precious little action. For example, most of the recommendations in the Lamy report into inequality in the criminal justice system have yet to be implemented 3 years after the report was published. Similarly, the long-delayed and damning report by Wendy Williams into the Windrush scandal has yet to be implemented. I spoke last night to black community leaders, and they had a very clear message for the Prime Minister. Implement the reports you've already got. So can the Prime Minister now turbocharge the government's responses and tell us when he'll implement in full the Lamy report and the Windrush recommendations?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman, and of course I understand, as I said, I understand the very strong and legitimate feelings of people in this country at the death of George Floyd, and of course I agree that Black Lives Matter, and we are getting on with the implementation, not just of the Lamy report, but also the report into Windrush. For instance, on the Lamy report, for which this government commissioned, and for which I thank the honourable member for Tottenham, we are increasing already the number of black and minority ethnic people in the prison service, as David Lammy recommended. We are increasing the use of body-worn cameras, and we are trying to ensure, amongst other things, that young BNE people are not immediately prosecuted as a result of the trouble they find themselves in, and we try to make sure that we give people a chance. But I must stress that on the Lamy report and on all these matters, it is absolutely vital at the same time that we keep our streets safe and that we back our police. And that is what we are going to do.
Keir Starmer.
Mr Speaker, I welcome what the Prime Minister says about implementing the reports, and obviously we'll hold him to it. He will appreciate that people do notice when recommendations are made and then not implemented, so it's very important that they are implemented in accordance with those reports. Mr Speaker, the latest report is the Public Health England report on the disproportionate impact of COVID-19. That report concluded that death rates are highest amongst black and Asian ethnic groups. And it went on to say, and this was the important bit, that it's already clear that relevant guidance and key policies should be adapted to mitigate the risk. Already clear. If it is already clear that guidance and policy need to be changed, why has the government not already acted?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, not is it already clear, but we are already acting. And I can tell him that what we are doing, as a result of the report by Professor Fenton, which again we commissioned, we are looking at the particular exposure of black and minority ethnic groups to coronavirus, and be in no doubt they've been at the forefront of the struggle against coronavirus, whether it's in the NHS or in public transport. 44% of the NHS in London, or London workforce, is black and minority ethnic workers, and that is why what we are doing first and most directly is to ensure that those high contact professions get expanded and targeted testing now. And that's what I've agreed with Dido Harding from NHS Test and Trace. I think that's the first and most practical step we can take as a result of Professor Fenton's report.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the Prime Minister, I know, understands the frustration from those most at risk when they see a report like that and they know action is needed. And action is needed now, not in a few weeks or months. So can I ask the Prime Minister to complete, well, perhaps the Prime Minister will indicate whether that's all of the action or whether there's more action. This is a serious issue. We can make progress together. But it is important that it's done swiftly for those most at risk. Mr Speaker, I want to turn to the overall numbers of those that have tragically died from COVID-19, because those overall numbers haunt us. Since last Prime Minister's questions, the government's daily total figure for those that have died from coronavirus has gone past 40,000. The ONS figure, which records cases where coronavirus is on the death certificate, stands at just over 50,000. And the number of excess deaths, which is an awful phrase, stands at over 63,000. These are amongst the highest numbers anywhere in the world. Last week, the Prime Minister said he was proud of the government's record. But there's no pride in those figures, is there?
Mr. Speaker, let me just say that on the death figures for this country, we mourn everyone, and we grieve for them and for their relatives and their friends. But I must also tell him, and he's raised this point repeatedly across the dispatch box, the best scientific evidence and advice is that we must wait until the epidemic has been through its whole cycle in order to draw the relevant international comparisons. And that, I'm afraid, I simply must repeat that point to him. And as for what this country did to fight the epidemic, I must say I strongly disagree with the way he characterises it. I think it was an astonishing achievement of the NHS to build the Nightingale hospitals. I think it was an astonishing thing that this country came together to drive down, to follow the social distancing rules, in spite of all the doubt that was cast on the advice, to follow those rules, to get the number of deaths down, to get the epidemic under control in the way that we have. And this government has announced a plan on May the 11th to get our country back onto its feet, and that is what we are going to do. We have a plan, we're following it, and we're going to stick to it.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it just doesn't wash to say that we can't compare these figures to other countries. Everybody can see those figures and see the disparity, and we need to learn from those other countries. What did they do more quickly than us? What did they do differently to us? Because we can learn those lessons and ensure that the numbers come down. And it's little solace to the families that have lost someone to simply be told this is too early to compare and to learn from other countries. And of course there will be long-term consequences as a result of the government's approach. I want to turn now to another aspect of government policy, and that's school reopening. We all want as many children back into school as soon as it's possible and as soon as it's safe. What that required for that to happen was a robust national plan, consensus among all key stakeholders, and strong leadership from the top. All three are missing. The current arrangements lie in tatters. Parents have lost confidence in the government's approach. Millions of children will miss 6 months' worth of schooling, and inequality will now go up. Several weeks ago, I suggested to the Prime Minister that we set up a national task force so everybody could put their shoulder to the wheel. It's not too late. Will the Prime Minister take me up on this?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I told the House before, I've been in contact with the Right Honourable Gentleman by a modern device called the telephone, in which we've tried to agree a way forward, which he's then seemed to deviate from later on. Last week he was telling the House that it was not yet safe for kids to go back to school. This week he's saying that not enough kids are going back to school. I really think he needs to make up his mind. And since he's so fond of these international comparisons, he should know that there are some countries in the EU, in Europe, where no primary school kids are going back to school. I think, and we are being extremely cautious in our approach. We're following the plan that we set out, and I think that the people of this country will want to follow it. And all the evidence cites, 97% of the schools that have submitted data are now seeing kids come back to school. And I think what we would like to hear from the Right Honourable Gentleman is a bit of support for that, and a bit of encouragement to pupils, and perhaps even encouragement to some of his friends in the left-wing trades unions to help get our schools ready.
Keir Starmer.
Have this out. The Prime Minister and I have never discussed our letter in any phone call. He knows it and I know it. The task force has never been the subject of a conversation between him and me one-to-one or in any other circumstance on the telephone. He knows it, so please drop that. Secondly, he mentions other countries. Plenty of other comparable countries are getting their children back to school. Wales is an example. Across Europe, there are other examples. We're the outlier on this. And it's no good, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister flailing around trying to blame others.
Order. We need to get through with lots of other members, so if we can listen to the question, then I certainly want to hear the answers. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I was saying it's no good the Prime Minister flailing around trying to blame others. A month ago today, he made the announcement about schools without consulting relevant parties, without warning about the dates, and without any scientific backing for his proposal. It's time he took responsibility for his own failures. This mess was completely avoidable. The consequences are stark. The Children's Commissioner has warned of a deepening education disadvantage gap. And she spoke yesterday, her words, the Children's Commissioner, an emerging picture which doesn't give confidence that there's a strategic plan. She called for the government to scale up their response. It must have occurred to the government that space would be a problem, that there would be a need for temporary accommodation and classrooms. They built the Nightingale hospitals. Why are they only starting on schools now?
Mr. Speaker, he still can't work out whether he's saying schools are not safe enough or whether we should be going back more quickly. I mean, he can't have it both ways, Mr. Speaker. It's one brief one day, another brief the next. I understand how the legal profession works, but what the public want to have is some consistency, Mr. Speaker. And what I hope that he will agree with me is that it's a good thing that we've now got 37% of kids in Year 6 in our primary schools coming back. That is increasing the whole time. And what I think the message that I think that teachers want to hear across the country is that all parliamentarians in this House of Commons support the return of kids to school. And furthermore, that they are encouraging kids to come back to school because it is safe. Will he now say that?
Keir Starmer.
I want as many children to go back to school as possible, as soon as possible, as quickly as possible when it's safe. I've been saying that like a broken record for weeks on end. I know the Prime Minister's got rehearsed attack lines, but he should look at what I wrote from this letter and what I've been saying consistently. Mr. Speaker, one way in which the government could help those worst affected would be to extend the national voucher scheme. Because child poverty numbers are so high in this country, 1.3 million children in low-income families rely on these vouchers. They mean children who can't go to school because of coronavirus restrictions still get free meals. The Labour government in Wales has said it will continue to fund these meals through the summer. Yesterday, the Education Secretary said that won't be the case in England. That's just wrong, and it will lead to further inequality. So can I urge the Prime Minister to reconsider on this point?
Prime Minister.
What I can tell the right honourable gentleman is, of course, we don't normally continue with free school meals over the summer holidays, but we are also, of course, and I'm sure that's right, we're also, of course, aware of the particular difficulties faced by vulnerable families, and that's why we're announcing a further £63 million of local welfare assistance to be used by local authorities at their discretion to help the most vulnerable families, Mr. Speaker. This government has put its arms round the people of this country throughout this crisis and has done its absolute best, to help. And I may say it is not helped by the wobbling and tergiversation of the Labour Party and the gentleman opposite. Last week he says it's not safe. This week he says we're not going fast enough. We protected the NHS, Mr. Speaker. We provided huge numbers of ventilated beds. We're now getting the disease under control, but we will do it in a cautious and contingent way. And today I will be announcing further measures to open up our society and to unlock our society, but only because of the huge efforts and the sacrifice that this country has made. We're sticking to our plan of May the 11th. We're sticking to our plan. It's a plan that is working and will continue to work, Mr. Speaker, with or without the assistance of the right honourable gentleman opposite.